Good evening. I want to start with a question that sounds like the plot of a thriller. What if I told you that nearly 3 centuries of European history, the entire early Middle Ages between 614 and 911 AD, never actually happened? That Charlemagne was a fictional character, that the Viking raids were invented, and that we are living in the year 1726, not 2026. This is the phantom time hypothesis, and tonight we're going to examine it from every angle. Not to endorse it, but to understand why it captured the public imagination and what real evidence tells us about the past. Here's our journey for the next 20 minutes. We'll start by unpacking the claim itself, who made it, and what exactly they alleged. Then we'll meet the two historical figures accused of perpetrating the greatest forgery in history. After that, we'll walk through the evidence that dismantles the hypothesis: astronomy, dendrochronology, and the inconvenient fact that the rest of the world was having a very busy few centuries. Finally, we'll ask why a theory this thoroughly debunked continues to attract believers. Let's begin. Let's unpack this claim. Illig's argument rests on a single numerical observation. When Pope Gregory XIII reformed the calendar in 1582, he removed 10 days to realign Easter with the spring equinox. But Illig calculated that the accumulated error since Julius Caesar's calendar reform in 45 BC should have been closer to 13 days. That 3-day gap, he argued, represented roughly 3 centuries of time that never elapsed, phantom years inserted into the record. If true, this would mean that Charlemagne, the Viking Age, the rise of Islam, and the Tang Dynasty's golden age in China were all either invented or wildly misdated. The implications are staggering, but as we'll see, the evidence crumbles under scrutiny. Who was Heribert Illig, and why did his book cause such a stir? He was an outsider, a publisher by trade with no formal training in medieval history, archaeology, or astronomy. Yet his book tapped into a deep cultural current in 1990s Germany, a willingness to question established narratives. Illig presented himself as a courageous truth seeker taking on the academic establishment. His readers found the argument seductive because it offered a simple, conspiratorial explanation for gaps and ambiguities that real medievalists had spent careers studying. But as we'll now explore, Illig's thesis required 2 very specific villains, and a motive that strains credulity. Now let's turn to the heart of Illig's accusation. Every good conspiracy needs conspirators, and Illig named 2 of the most powerful men in European history. Their alleged crime was not murder or theft, but something far more ambitious: the fabrication of time itself. These are the 2 men Illig accused, and at first glance they make compelling villains. Sylvester II was so learned that later legend turned him into a sorcerer who had made a pact with the devil. Otto III was a dreamer who saw himself as a new Constantine. But the theory requires us to believe that these 2 men coordinated a fraud of staggering scale, forging thousands of charters, letters, and chronicles, planting fake archaeological sites across an entire continent, and somehow silencing every scribe, monk, and scholar who might have noticed. Even more remarkably, they supposedly did this without leaving a single contemporary document confessing or exposing the plot. The logistical impossibility alone should give us pause. Let's put the number on the board: 297 years. To give you a sense of scale, that's longer than the entire history of the United States. It's the distance between Shakespeare and today. Illig asks us to believe that this span was fabricated, that hundreds of documented reigns, wars, cultural shifts, and religious movements either never occurred or were deliberately backdated by 3 centuries. Now, let's examine the evidence that makes this claim impossible to sustain. And this is where Illig's hypothesis unravels. The evidence against phantom time comes from multiple independent disciplines: astronomy, botany, archaeology, and global history. None of these fields can be faked, and all of them tell the same story. Those 297 years were real. This is perhaps the single most devastating rebuttal. Celestial mechanics don't lie. When Pliny the Elder described a solar eclipse in 59 AD, he gave enough detail that modern astronomers can retrocalculate its path and confirm the date precisely. The same applies to the meticulous astronomical records kept by Chinese imperial astronomers during the Tang Dynasty. which, remember, spanned the very centuries Illig claims didn't exist. And Halley's Comet is a clockwork visitor. Its 76-year orbit is so predictable that we can calculate its appearances thousands of years into the past or future. Every recorded apparition of Halley's Comet from 66 AD through the Middle Ages matches the expected schedule. If 297 years had been inserted, those comet sightings would drift farther and farther from prediction. They don't. Now here is evidence you can literally hold in your hand. Trees in temperate climates add one growth ring per year, no exceptions. By matching ring-width patterns from living trees to ancient timbers, and those to even older preserved wood, scientists have built continuous chronologies stretching back millennia. In Germany and Ireland, oak chronologies cover every single year of the supposed phantom period. If 297 years had been fabricated, tree ring sequences would show a sudden jump, a missing segment. They don't. Moreover, wooden beams from Carolingian buildings, the very architecture Illig claims was backdated, slot perfectly into these master sequences at exactly the dates conventional history assigns them. The trees themselves testify that the years were real. And here's the final common-sense objection. Illig's theory is entirely Eurocentric. While Europe was supposedly sleeping through 3 phantom centuries, the rest of the world was wide awake. The Tang dynasty in China kept meticulous court records, conducted imperial examinations, and fought wars, all independently dated and cross-referenced with astronomical events. Islam emerged, spread across 3 continents, and produced a golden age of science and philosophy. Indian mathematicians developed the decimal system. Are we to believe that all of these civilizations, with their own independent calendars and chronicles, somehow synchronized their fabricated histories with a European conspiracy they had no knowledge of? The coordination problem alone makes the hypothesis absurd. Let's walk through what conventional history tells us actually happened during this period. These are not obscure events. They are turning points that shaped the modern world. In 618, the Tang dynasty began its 3-century reign in China, producing poetry, technology, and bureaucracy that would influence East Asia forever. In 622, the Prophet Muhammad's journey to Medina launched the Islamic calendar, a chronological system entirely independent of European reckoning. The Umayyad conquest of Spain in 711 reshaped the Mediterranean world. Charlemagne's coronation in 800 created the template for European kingship. Alfred the Great began unifying England in 871. Each of these events left physical, documentary, and cultural traces that no calendar manipulation could fabricate. Now let me leave you with a thought about why, despite all this evidence, the phantom time hypothesis refuses to die. I chose this quote because it captures something important about the phantom time hypothesis. It's not just wrong, it's entertainingly wrong. And that entertainment value is part of why it persists. Medieval historians don't lose sleep over Illig's theory because the evidence against it is so overwhelming, but they do sometimes use it as a teaching tool, a vivid example of how multiple independent lines of evidence, astronomical, botanical, archaeological, and textual, can converge to give us confidence in the historical timeline. The real story of how we know what we know is in many ways more fascinating than any conspiracy. So why does this theory endure? First, it's a great story, and human beings are storytelling creatures. A pope and an emperor forging centuries of history is narratively irresistible. Second, it preys on a genuine historical reality. The early Middle Ages did leave fewer written records than the periods before and after, which creates a real scholarly challenge that Illig exploited. Third, and I want to be candid about this, the theory appeals to a certain intellectual vanity. It makes the believer feel like an insider who has seen through the establishment's lies, and in the age of social media, a sensational claim travels much faster than a careful refutation. Our job, as thoughtful people, is to resist the lure of the elegant falsehood and do the harder work of understanding the messy, complex truth. And that brings me to my final point. Let me close with this. Illig's theory is, at bottom, a failure of imagination. It assumes that if a document can be forged, history itself can be forged. But the past is not just ink on parchment. It's encoded in tree rings and eclipse paths, in the foundations of buildings and the layers of archaeological sites, in the independent chronicles of civilizations that never spoke to one another. The real Middle Ages, messy, complex, and undeniably real, left its fingerprints everywhere. The phantom time hypothesis is a fascinating intellectual exercise and a useful reminder that we should question what we're told. But when we do question, we must also listen to the answers. Thank you.